So without further ado, please welcome Erika and Sylvia to the stage.
Hi everyone, welcome today to the program. I am so excited to get the chance to talk with Erika Sánchez today on the book, I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. So how about we get started?
Sure.
Awesome.
Thank you for being here. This is amazing. It really is.
So one of the first questions I had is just around this idea of belief, which runs under the theme that the Humanities Festival is putting out. So my question for you is, what experiences made you believe in the need for writing a book like this for young people?
I wrote a book that I wanted to read as a child, as a teenager. When I was growing up, we didn't really have access to books like that. We had The House on Mango Street, which was beautiful, but I mean, that came out 33 years ago. And so I felt like it was time for, it came out when I was born. And so I felt like it was really necessary to have a book about a young girl of color coming of age. I wanted girls of color to feel validated and to know that they matter and to feel less alone.
So maybe let's unpack that a little bit as far as the things that Julia also believes in as a character. Can you talk a little bit about those similarities between yourself and the character in which you feel kind of like, oh, I really believe this and I want to put this in the book so other people can read about that kind of experience?
Sure. People ask me if I am Julia, which is a funny question. The answer is no, it is fiction. However, there are a lot of similarities, of course. I put myself into the character. I put myself into a lot of the characters. And so Julia is a very strong-willed, flawed, snarky, sarcastic girl. And maybe I was, maybe I wasn't at 15. And she's going through this really terrible time. Her sister dies, and she's grappling with that. And there are so many expectations put upon her. And Julia believes in being independent, and she believes in determining her own life. And she's a feminist, and etc. And her parents are just totally confounded by who she is. And so, despite all the problems that her beliefs cause, she continues to be who she is.
So would you say some of those expectations fall a lot from the family? Are there other expectations you think were sort of put on Julia that you're sort of thinking throughout the book?
Sure. I think young girls of color are often really underestimated. And so I wanted to show that they can have ambition and that they can dream and be storytellers and want big things for themselves.
Yeah, and that's something that I picked on actually right away, even just with the title, I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, as far as, when I first came on the book, I was like, I have to read this, and the more that I read it, the more I started thinking about Julia, and she's sort of operating on this really strong sense of belief on her sister. I mean, that's sort of what the book starts with. Can you talk a little bit about how even her own belief is challenged through the book as she unpacks the story of her sister?
Yeah, so her sister was always like the perfect kid or the perfect daughter. And, she was very obedient and family-oriented and didn't really stray away from the home. And Julia was the total opposite. And so after her death, something starts to pick away at Julia. She's wondering what was underneath the facade. She feels like there's something that she's not really understanding. And so the book, it takes you through that journey of her understanding her sister, understanding herself, understanding her family.
Yeah, and I think even throughout the book, there are several themes that come up as far as like her family's experiences and her own as a young adult in school, but then also facing a lot of different things. And so what started to bridge the beliefs between cultural expectations and then even her own identity?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It's a tough one. I came with some tough questions today.
Well, in the process, without giving too much away, in the process of her, discovering herself and coming of age, she starts to make sense. She makes sense of her family and why they are the way they are. And so I think that's one of the bridges where she sees things in context. She's starting to grow as a person and mature and understand that her parents are human beings and they're flawed too, and why they're flawed.
Yeah, no, I mean, there were a lot of times when we were talking earlier, I really related to a lot of the content that was put out specifically for young people. And so I'm also interested in even just you. Did you ever find yourself struggling, and how did that influence even your writing outside of just this book? But, did you ever find yourself struggling with expectations as a person or as a writer, and how does that shape the way you write or respond?
Yeah, I think when you're a woman of color, not much is expected from you, unfortunately. Like, you're seen as someone to serve others. And I'm so tired of that, and it's just, there's value in that, of course. However, we can be whatever we want, and I wanted to show that in the book. And yeah, there have been many times where I've been underestimated for who I am, like I'm a Mexican American. I grew up very working class, and I've had many incidents where in white spaces, institutions where I was underestimated and I was doubted, and I think that's a very common experience.
What do you do with that doubt? How do you push it? What do you do with it? Do you respond?
It's easier to be angry than to be sad, I think. And so I channel that frustration into my work. And maybe this is a little bit unhealthy, but I'm also an overachiever. I just really want to get things done and do well and prove that narrative wrong.
Yeah, and actually, I think there were moments in the book where Julia sort of proves the narrative wrong. I think of the trip to the museum and how she sort of stands up for herself and says, well, I'm going to use this word because language is a tool for power, right? That's something that her teacher taught her in class. Can you talk a little bit about how you think of language as a tool for power?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes, marginalized communities are kept from literature, or kept from the written word, are kept from the language of power. And the language of power is the way, I guess, to put it mildly or not, the way white people communicate, the words that they use, the expressions that they use. And learning those kinds of things is really valuable in moving up in a social ladder, right? The way I speak here is not the way I speak with my friends. The way I speak at a job interview isn't the way I speak, when I'm at a party. And so understanding that difference is really important, and she understands that. And her teacher is the one who tells her, there's a language of power, but that doesn't mean that the language that you use with your friends isn't valuable. That's also very beautiful and inventive, but they're different, and you need to know how to use both in different spaces, just for your own advantage, for survival, really.
Yeah, and I think that was something I found really valuable, is that Julia was consistently almost unapologetic about her identity and what she was going through, and that sort of allowed a depth to her character that I really appreciated. So at least I know I got a lot out of it, and I'm not, a young adult anymore, as much as it may look like. But I'm also just sort of wondering, what do you hope this book does for anyone that picks it up, not just young adults, but anyone that's sort of maybe initial reaction is, oh, wow, let me see what this is all about.
Yeah, I hope to ruffle some feathers for sure. I know that she's not an easy character to love all the time. She makes a lot of mistakes, and she's kind of mean at times, and she's angry, etc. But I want people to understand the experience of being a child of immigrants and how navigating two cultures could be really incredibly stressful. I want people to understand that the humanity of immigrants. Unfortunately, we have to like reaffirm that all the time, as if we're not human just by existing. I think that it's important for other people to understand what it's like to live like that in this country. And I believe literature is a very powerful tool for empathy. And also, most importantly for me, is I want young girls to feel like they matter. And that I see them, and that they are entitled to want more and to dream and to, you know, be who they are.
Yeah, you know, as you're talking about, it sounded a lot like you just wanted to make a book that validates a lot of, you know, varied experiences for young people. But what I really appreciated too, and I don't want to give too much away for those that haven't read it yet, but just how culturally relevant it is, you know, and specific to today too. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, that in general, or and sort of give people a sense of like why a culturally relevant book is really that critical, and how, yeah, maybe just talk a little bit on that too.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people of certain cultures to be able to tell their own stories. I don't think that's often the case. I think the publishing world is changing, but not fast enough for my liking. But I think this book is very timely, and that's unfortunate. I wish it weren't. I wish it weren't relevant. And people always comment about that like, oh wow, this is just like the perfect book for this time. But this time sucks. You know? It's a terrifying time. There's so much hatred and horrible rhetoric about people of color, of immigrants. Our president is just like a really hateful person. And I hope, and this is me being idealist, I hope that books like this could challenge certain people's like notions of what it is to be Mexican.
What are some of the books that you found challenged you as a person, like maybe even in some ways influenced or inspired you to do this in the first place?
Oh man, I've always been a nerdy kid, and well, I'm no longer a kid, unfortunately, but I think the work of Sandra Cisneros was really important to me. That was the first time I ever read anything that was remotely related to who I was. And so that was really exciting. And Toni Morrison is one of my favorite writers ever. And the way she writes about oppression in a way that is just so beautiful and brutal at the same time. And the way her characters are so dignified and complicated, and I'm in awe of her work. And so reading her is extremely challenging because it's a very heavy subject matter, and it's a lot about slavery, you know. And I wanted to write something that evoked those feelings for others as well. Like the way I feel reading her, I would hope that I could do that for other readers. I wish to be like half as good as her because she's just phenomenal.
So what do you do when maybe you know, there's this sort of like when you're trying to find common ground with people that don't have those experiences that are similar to yours, or maybe don't agree with everything? Is there a way in which you process that as a writer, or what do you do with that? Maybe even just as a person?
It's hard, especially now, because the rhetoric is so extreme that it's really hard to be compassionate towards a person that hates you just automatically. And so I find that really challenging, and that's something that I've been working on. Like, how do you bridge that? And I haven't figured it out personally. I think I do part of that through my writing, and I just hope that the way that I've been so influenced by books, I hope that others will be as well by my books. And I hope that even if it doesn't like change who they are as a person, like it starts a conversation or starts some sort of questioning of some sort.
Yeah, so what advice would you give to people about finding common ground?
Ooh.
Especially if the beliefs are different,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
You're just talking about your own struggle, but say a young person, maybe even someone in the audience is sort of faced with that right now. What advice would you give them? Do you even think that the common ground is important?
I think it depends on the situation. Sometimes if you're being challenged, it depends on how, and sometimes it feels like dangerous to be confronted with someone who really doesn't believe what you believe. But I think at the end of the day, we're all human and we all experience the human condition. We all live, die, get sick, suffer, love, experience joy. And so if we could understand that about each other, I think that could be really powerful. That ultimately, everyone wants to live a dignified life. Everyone wants to care for their family. Everyone wants to be happy. And so having conversations, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
And even when they're uncomfortable, I think, well, that's even more important, I think, when they're uncomfortable. When, it's difficult to talk about, your feelings and ideologies conflict, because I think a lot happens when people engage in a dialogue. People can change. I have hope that people can change. And if I didn't, I don't know what I'd do. I'd probably just like hide under my bed or something.
Yeah, no, and I actually have this, at least I also have that hope. I have this strong belief that we want to find common ground, we want to connect, and we're just sort of figuring out the language or the way in which to open that conversation up. And I reflect on that only because I saw that happening with Julia, too, where there were moments where I was like, she's really struggling to communicate what she's going through. And it was easy for me to find common ground with the character because there were so many multiple points to access a character going through so many different things, right? So I think about as far as like these like identities that she's carrying are multiple, right? There's like this almost like this, what's the word I'm looking for? Like interconnected ability to like, oh, well, she's coming from this family, or oh, these traditions, or oh, these experiences in high school. Did you intentionally think about, as you were going, how did you, sorry, I know I'm trailing, but my mind is so excited. But as far as like, how did you figure out how to create sort of like a way for it to be able to be readable?
Yeah, I guess there is a lot there.
Yeah.
And I think...
I know, there's a lot in here too. I was like, oh my goodness, how do I phrase this?
Well, it took me five years from start to publication. So it did take me a really long time to write the book. And I think that had a lot to do with it. I was really determined to create a character that was complicated, because as human beings, we're complicated. And no one wants to read a story about a character who's virtuous and gets everything they want. That's not fun. And so I just wanted to give her a lot of depth, and I wanted it to be character-driven, but also plot-driven, because I wanted it to be fun. I also wanted it to be funny. I wanted her to like make the reader laugh. And so all of these components I somehow crammed together into this one character. And I'm just so pleased that people really do connect to her and understand her and, see themselves in her.
Yeah, well, she's just so multidimensional. You know what I mean? When you were talking about figuring out a way to cram it all, I think about our experiences as people, right? As you could say, characters in this larger plot of life.
Sure.
Like we are experiencing and we're multidimensional people. And so I really get that sense in the book.
Thank you.
Yeah. I want to know a little bit more too, because you have like a resource at the end about mental health and wellness. Can you talk a little bit about how that developed?
Sure. Well, in this story, Julia struggles with depression, and that's something that's been very important to me to normalize, to speak openly about that, because the stigma is just really unhealthy, and it's really unfortunate that young people feel like that they cannot, reach out for help because it's seen as something shameful. And so I wanted to challenge that. I wanted to make people aware that it's an illness like any other, and that it is also treatable, and just, push back against the stigma. It's just not healthy.
Why do you think that stigma or that shame even happens in the first place?
I think because people don't understand what it is. Like, people will, and this has happened to me, like, cheer up, if you're depressed. Well, it's not that simple, It's an illness, and it requires treatment. It's not just like put on a happy face and change your attitude. It's very deeply seated, and so I wanted to show that it's a complicated issue.
Yeah, so I guess maybe we can trail from that a little bit, but what's something or someone that you used to believe in but no longer trust? So thinking about like maybe something that was treated as fact before and you had this doubt and then you sort of started to question it.
I feel like I'm constantly questioning, and I think that's a really important part of being a person. I think it's important to ask yourself why you believe what you believe, to get to the root of your ideologies, because some of the things that we believe are just like passed down and we don't question, and we just kind of go along with it. And like Julia does, and this is what I did as a kid, I would be like, well, how come the women have to do all the work and the men just sit around?
Yeah, how come?
Right? Like, I didn't think that was fair. And I pushed against that to everyone's chagrin. No one liked me complaining about that sort of stuff. But I think it's the way you grow as a person to question like what you believe. I change all the time, and I hope to always be better. So specifically, I used to not really be a spiritual person necessarily, and then I found Buddhism, and I changed, and I became Buddhist, and it changed my entire outlook on life. I became more hopeful, and everything started to make sense.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm already taking some of this advice and putting it in my pocket as far as, asking all these critical questions and really thinking through. I think even too, like, there were moments when Julia's in school and she has a lot of questions and doubts too, right? And I've told students, I work with young people, and I've told students, don't trust everything I say, you should question, right? And that's sort of like the process. Do you feel, what questions did you have as you were navigating writing this book?
Sure. Well, that's an excellent trait to have as a teacher, by the way, to let your students know that they can question, because that's a really important thing that kids should do, and they often do, and adults shouldn't shut them down, because they're trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out who they are, and they're trying to see their place in the world. But I think I questioned sometimes my sanity, for sure, when I was writing this book. I'm like, who the hell cares? Like, will anyone even publish it? Because, you grow up as a brown girl and you think no one cares about what you think, and you're not really validated very much. And so there were a lot of moments where I'm like, who do I think I am trying to be a writer, And that's just really sad. And I don't want other girls to feel like that. You can do it, and you should do it.
And when did you take that step? You were like, no, yes, I'm going through this, but no, I want to be a writer. I want to claim that. When do you feel like that happened for you?
It would happen off and on all the time. Like, there would be times where I'm like, what am I doing with myself? What is this life? Like, I can't make a living as a writer. And then I just kept going, because that was the only thing that made sense to me, the only thing that I wanted to do. And so even when I was working these jobs that I did not care about, I'd be writing on the side. I'd be writing on the weekends. I'd be writing in the evenings, and people would ask me to hang out, and I'd be like, nope, sorry, gotta write. And that made me really uncool, but that's okay.
I think it's okay to be uncool. I mean,
yeah.
I feel like actually there were moments in here where I wanted to jump in the book and be the other teacher that was like, no, this is fine. You're going through these things. It's okay. Did you ever feel like you had that kind of support from anyone as you were growing up and you had these doubts or you had these questions?
Yeah, actually, two of my favorite teachers went to my book release the other day.
Oh, nice.
And it was so amazing. It was beautiful to see them because they really encouraged me when I was 15. And Mr. Sislo is his name, was my English teacher. He would give me like packets. He would make packets of poetry for me because he knew that I loved poetry. And I still have it somewhere, that packet. And I just think that's so valuable. Like, I'll never forget that. Or like teachers letting me borrow their books and talking to me about music. And because I was a weird kid and not everyone had the same interests. And my teachers saw that and they encouraged me. And it just made such a difference.
So those poetry packets.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of the poems that you were like, you clung to?
Yes.
What were those?
Well, the writer Sharon Olds, I remember there were some poems by Sharon Olds, and the way she wrote about the female body and about desire and just like really uncomfortable things, I just thought that was so cool. I was like, oh, you could write like that? It just fascinated me, and when I saw that, it gave me permission to write what I wanted to write.
Do you feel like at any point Julia was giving herself permission to be who she is? Or was that sort of a struggle?
I think it was a constant struggle for her because no one wanted her to be who she was.
Yeah.
And despite that, she was, And I think that's a common story for young women, that so much is expected of them. And they don't always want to live up to those expectations. And, sometimes we're not what our parents expected at all.
Yeah, and I actually want to maybe flip that and start considering, because I think that, again, if we're asking questions, questions allow us to enter into a new way of thinking, right? So if we're sort of faced with, and Julia is also faced with this consistently, a lot of expectations. What happens when we flip that and maybe ask a question of what's something that you do want? What's something that does?
Well, I think hope is really important, particularly now. I believe that all people are capable of being good. As a Buddhist, I believe everyone has the capacity for Buddhahood. And that's something that is keeping me afloat these days. I think that even when people do terrible things, deep down, they still have the capacity to be good. And I'm really interested in what happens to a person to make them violent, to make them, hateful. How does that happen? Because we're not born that way. I don't believe that. I feel like we could all be empathetic. We could all be, respectful of each other. So why aren't some people that way? Like, what happens?
Yeah, and I actually really appreciate, again, I'm going to return to that idea of Julia as being such a multidimensional character, is that it allowed me to enter from a space of empathy. Yeah. Right? And so I think that's sort of what you're talking about, like asking those questions about why does this happen? And there's almost like consistently I felt like I want her to receive more empathy. I want her to be a little bit more understood. I also believe that there should be these opportunities for us to connect and ask questions and have an opportunity to think for ourselves what it is that we're going to do with our role, right?
Right.
How we're impacted by different things happening all around and what choices we make.
Right. Yeah, I mean, every cause has an effect. You know, like whatever you do, there's going to be a consequence. And so I think it's really important to know that. And I think also in the course of the book, she starts to see her parents, as I said, as human beings, and she understands where they're coming from. And I think that's really important. Like, we see why her mother's so overprotective, you know, and her father is so, like, withdrawn. People are complicated, and there's so much that we don't see, and there's a lot that we assume.
Yeah. And I think what gives me hope is that this book exists. You know, you were talking about Sandra Cisneros, and you were mentioning how that was written so long ago, and you still remember that as being like the first place where you found a part of your narrative. I want to talk about how I really hope that more people pick up this book, read it, share it with a young person, because I really do, believe that if more people have a space to feel included and to feel heard and seen, that allows for that common ground to start.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's hard to flourish when people don't understand who you are. And there's so many things that young people go through, at that age. And if adults could remember what it's like to be a young person, I think that's really important. Like, we all did embarrassing, terrible things, I mean, being a teenager is hard. And I don't know, I certainly made a lot of mistakes. And I remember that. And I want young people to know that I know how tough it is.
Yeah, so I think we are going to open it up soon for questions. So for the audience, for any of you that have read the book or maybe throughout the conversation heard something that drew your interest, now would be a really great time for us to connect more directly with Erika.
So there's two of us with microphones. If you feel free to raise your hand and give us a second to come to you.
Hi. What would be your advice for the Mexican mothers or the Mexican parents to help Mexican daughters to be happy, flourish, and thrive in life?
That's a beautiful question.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Well, my mom's over there. Hi, Mom. I think it's really important to understand that your children don't necessarily belong to you, that they're their own person, and that, girls go through a lot of things when they're teenagers. I know a lot of parents try to believe that young people are not going to have sex and they're not going to be in relationships, but that is not true. That is so unrealistic. And so accept that your daughter is a sexual person, and that she probably will have a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. And I think it's just really important to see your children as people, not just your children. Like, they have their own hopes and their own dreams and their own desires, and to encourage that, not stifle that. And I think just asking that question shows that you care about your children and that you care about their happiness, and that means a lot.
I'll take the one in the middle.
As a young person, did you ever think you would be a writer, or did you have another idea before writing?
Well, no, I was always very delusional. I always wanted to be a writer ever since I was 12. Could I have conceived this? No. The fact that you're all here listening to me, I still am in shock. The fact that I'm on the New York Times bestsellers list, how did that happen? I don't know. But yeah, I've been a writer since I was a kid, and it's the only thing that I've ever truly wanted to do. And so I wish I would have wanted something else sometimes, because it would have made my life easier, for sure.
Okay. We have another one over here.
Hi, so
first and foremost, I want to say thank you for writing me and so many other brown and black faces into a book and making our voices heard. My question is, how would you encourage brown and black faces to engage in white heteronormative spaces as their whole selves with their intersecting identities? I know it's kind of a loaded question.
Oh, that's so loaded.
Loaded questions.
Wow. I could probably teach a class on that, perhaps. I think it's really important to always be authentic, to be who you are, but to also understand that when you're in different spaces, you might want to adapt accordingly. And so, like I said before, the way I go to a job interview, the way I conduct myself is not the same way as I would conduct myself with my family or my friends. It's just not like a good idea, because I know I probably won't get that job if I start saying, the F word. But I'm still who I am, deep down, I still have the same beliefs. I still am Erika, but I know to get to the place that I want, that I need to act a certain way and I need to speak a certain way. And navigating that is really tough. It's so tough. So to be authentic, but then to adapt, and then to be one person with this group, to be another person with that group. I think that's also part of being human, to have multiple selves, like the way Julia has multiple selves. She's just multifaceted. And so to always remember that, be true to who you are, but know what space you're in, and challenge that space also, not to say that you're supposed to, if you're in a job or a professional setting, to be submissive. I don't think that is the case at all. Like you could push back, but in a way that is not necessarily, well, it depends. Sometimes I do want to be aggressive. I don't know. It's hard. It is hard. I'm going to think about that for a long time.
Next question.
Hi, thank you so much for writing this book. I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Sure, I can stand up. Hi. So one of my favorite scenes in the book was, and I don't want to give up too much of the book, but she talks about indigenous people in Mexico, and she has a really snarky comment. I mean, she doesn't say it out loud, but she talks a lot about how we, the Hispanic culture, think of indigenous people as being less of a class, and it made me think a lot about what was going on in your mind. Like, I love that little bit of you maybe telling us to check on that too.
Yeah, thank you for noticing that.
Yeah, so I was hoping you can just elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, that's one thing that I feel really strongly about. There's a definite issue of colorism in Latinx or Latino culture, where brown, dark people are seen as inferior, and that goes back to colonization. It goes back to the caste system. We had an actual caste system in Mexico, and my intention there was to challenge that. Like, why is her cousin, for instance, looking down on the indigenous people when she herself is that dark? And to understand that we come in all sorts of different colors and shades, and that's just the reality of Latin America. But I'm always thinking about race and how we interact with it, and how we see ourselves and see others. I remember when I was teaching in the Dominican Republic, there was a little girl who, she was dark, and she drew herself as blonde and blue-eyed, and it broke my heart. I was like, wow. I mean, she was beautiful as she was, but she didn't see that. She didn't believe that.
Okay, we have another one down here.
How did you, when you had to deal with because you're Latina, and like when people expected less from you, how do you deal with that without losing your mind?
Well, first of all, you're adorable. Second of all, I did sometimes. There were times where I was really pissed. There was a time where a professor in grad school essentially told me I wasn't smart enough for his class. Yeah. And I was so angry. And I filed a complaint and blah, blah, blah. Nothing happened. That guy's still there. He's a terrible person. But recently, because I am a little bit petty at times, another professor I know there, he's a good friend of mine. He found out about, Princeton, that I was teaching there, and I was like, could you just let Matt Hofer know that I teach at Princeton? It felt good.
Next question.
Okay, so I just kind of wanted to congratulate you because you're up here in front of all of us, telling us how you feel and expressing your true emotions rather than just hiding them. And my question is as a Latina woman, not exactly just Mexican, I am half Honduran and Colombian. I feel like we can just relate as Latinos, and we're here in a community. And my question was that why you only chose to say I'm not your perfect Mexican daughter. Do you just believe it's towards the Mexican community or towards all Latino communities, even though I still related to it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there is a lot of power in specificity. I wrote about a Mexican girl because I was a Mexican girl, but that's not to say that other girls cannot relate to that. I hope that Black girls relate to it. I hope that you relate to it. I hope that everybody does. And so I just wanted to write from that specific point of view because it's important to me. But I think that when a piece of literature is good, it transcends race, it transcends nationality, it transcends, ethnicity. And so I hope that I was able to accomplish that with the book.
Thank you for writing this book. It's an important book in so many different ways. And I'm curious about the plot. There seem to be two really important interventions in her life, her English teacher and her therapist. Was it your intent to, would she have gotten over this without those interventions from, I assume, people who gave her confidence in herself?
That I never considered. I would hope so. It's hard to say, I think that it's really important to have a support system when you're a young person, to have people that believe in you, who care about you. And some people don't survive it, and that's a shame. And I think that it's really critical that we pay attention to the young people in our lives to offer that support because, not everyone has it. And perhaps you wouldn't have survived without that encouragement. I don't know. But I hope that it's a lesson for adults to pay attention to the teens in their life and to let them know that they're loved and encourage them and all of that.
Next question.
Hi. So my question was, how do you, what advice do you give to young Latinx people who want to be writers and be poets? Because I'm a slam poet and a writer, but sometimes my parents don't understand because they want me to go into a different career that's quote unquote gains more money. So what advice do you give to those people who are struggling to?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's not a lucrative career necessarily, so it's hard out there. I would just say that you should continue to do it if you absolutely love it. If that's your calling, if you feel in your heart that that's what you want to do, then you need to do it because otherwise you're never gonna be happy. I'm living my dreams right now, but there are times where I was just so confused, so discouraged. But I think it's only worth it if you truly, truly love to write. And if you do, I just hope that maybe I could be an example of like what is possible. And to believe in yourself and to, you know, find community and read as much as possible and, you know, come together with fellow writers and just, you know, find your people.
Okay, we've got another one down here.
Okay, I haven't read the book, but I just have a question. So throughout what you had said to the young girl over there, would you say that kind of losing your mind in the book kind of creates like the, oh, I really need to pay attention to this, and oh, I need to create change? You know, I feel like some people sometimes say like, oh, stay calm, you know, everything will move along. But but then like there's the people who, you know, explode, and then that's what causes the change. So do you think you put yourself like as the calm or more like the mind? Yeah.
That's a great question. No, I see what you're saying. I'm sure my friends and family would say that I am not calm. I have used my anger to fuel a lot of things, particularly my writing. I think that if you're outraged, first of all, everyone should be outraged right now. Like the way our country is progressing, like wow. I don't even, I have no words. So if you're not angry, then you're asleep. And so I think it's important to channel that frustration into actual change and, you know, making people aware of certain issues, protesting, whatever it is that you feel that you can do to make the world better. I think that there is value in being pissed off, for sure.
Hi. I'm not gonna lie, it's the first time I've heard of you, but I can just say I love you already.
Oh, thank you.
Everything you've said has connected, and I kind of wanted to go off of what the girl over there said. It's like, I'm Indian, I'm not Mexican, I have Mexican friends, and I know there's a lot of similarities in the culture. One of the things you said was like, why do women have to be the one in the kitchen and guys just like, you know, relax? Why do the women have to do all the work? And I just literally looked at my mom right next to me. It's like, hey, you know, just saying. But I had been blessed with like a very supportive family that's brought me up to be a very strong-willed person. And I strongly believe that, you know, you don't have to prove yourself to anybody. Like, you will do it yourself. You don't have to say something to do it. But because I'm so strong-willed, my grandmother and I always like butt heads. Like, we're like the stepsisters. Like, we love each other, but like we always butt heads. What would you advise? Like, how can I like respect her at the same point, like not lose who I am, like, but still try to get my point across to her? Like, how do I like be myself and not be sad or mad at myself that I said this later on?
Yeah, that's tough because it is frustrating when you're confronted with ideologies that are so against your own. But I think going back to the idea of understanding that everyone is a person, everyone is a human being that goes through, you know, suffering and love and joy. And to, you know, show that person respect that you're trying to understand where they're coming from. And so with that, could they understand where you're coming from? And to just like give that love to them. And hopefully they see that and return it.
Hi, I'm the mother of 2 young Mexican girls. This is my biggest fear, that all these people are looking at me. I just want to vomit. I want to tell you that I'm listening to you talk about this book and about the loss that Julia experienced in it. I lost my brother at a very young age, so I'm wondering where your inspiration came from. Was it a loss that you experienced? Was it something that you just drew out of there? But before you answer that, I have to tell you, before I got married, my last name was Zamora. When I got married, my last name is Smith. And I have 2 girls who look just like their mother, nothing like their father. And I had my daughter say to me, when people hear my name, they think that I'm going to look a certain way. When they see me, they're faced with the reality that I'm just a Mexican girl. Aww. So it was so sad and heartbreaking to me as a mom, to hear this from a, teenage girl who's struggling with who she really is, because on the one part, she identifies with all of her, white friends in our suburban neighborhood, and then on the other side of it, she's this, más mexicana que los frijoles little girl. So, yeah. I mean, that's just who she is. So I thank you. I really wish I would have brought her so she could have, heard you speak and understand that there's other people who feel what she's going through. So thank you for that. But if you could tell me where this inspiration came from, I would love to know.
Well, just going back to your daughters, I think that's a very American experience, and I think people forget that when people think American, especially in other countries, they think like white people, and that's not true. And we're so mixed in this country, and in even being Mexican American, I'm mixed. We're mestizo, right? So there's just like this constant flux of identity. But as far as the loss question, thankfully I've never lost anyone like that in my life, but I imagined what that would feel like, and I really channeled that. And the pain that I've experienced in my life, the depression that I've endured, I channeled that to hopefully depict a very realistic experience of grief.